First of all, huge welcome to everybody. It's such, again, a great pleasure and a real joy to see so many partners, members of different workforces, voluntary sector organisations alongside some of our statutory partners. And we're really, really delighted to be able to welcome you today to our first Small Steps, Big Changes Father Inclusive Conference. We've had a real journey in the SSBC programme around the Father Inclusive agenda, and I'm really looking forward to being able to share the infographic that I know Cara and Fliss have been working on at some point soon with you all. I think we started talking about being more father inclusive back in about 2017, 2018. There had been some work prior to that as well, where we were looking at things like our Fathers Reading Every Day, our FRED programme that our family mentors deliver. We'd also done some work really early on with the Fatherhood Institute around our Think Dads training. But in sort of 2018, 2019, we decided to really have a focus in on what did Father Inclusive mean to us in SSBC, what did it mean to our commissioned partners, what did it mean to our wider system partners, and most importantly, what did it mean to our fathers, the fathers that we were working with across a whole range of our services. It's now a core part of our ambition and our commitment to system change for SSBC. So it sits alongside our co-production ambitions, it sits alongside our wider workforce ambitions, and it sits alongside our commissioning ambitions around how we commission differently. So we've made a real commitment to that. We put resource behind it, we put funding behind it, and we actually raised the bar a little bit for some of our commission providers as well around how they were going to support us on that journey to become more father inclusive. And in terms of why did we do it, I think what we recognise both in SSBC and by speaking to our partners, whether they be a delivery partner or a commissioning partner, and as I said, most importantly the fathers and the male carers that we work with, we identified that there was a real gap in this area. So we identified that including fathers in a conversation about the importance of the first 1,001 days was itself a gap, that they weren't often included, they're not necessarily seen at some of those first visits. That understanding of why those first 1,001 days is so important. I think most of us in this room, who if we work in the early years pregnancy arena, understand that that is a crucial time. That pregnancy through to 2, pregnancy through to 3 to 4, as we sort of stretch out in SSBC, is an absolute important time. So why shouldn't dads be included in that conversation? We also recognise that there was a huge gap in terms of the advice and the information that fathers get around that. You know, they don't get the support necessarily as to what to expect as a new father, how it might impact them, how it might impact their relationship, how they might feel, how they can support their child, and how to be the best dad that they can be. So we've stepped into that space locally, and I think it's a growing space nationally as well, and we're delighted today to have some fabulous speakers with us to talk about their work. So I hope that you enjoy today. I hope you leave inspired to embrace the father inclusive journey and to become real champions and advocates for us on that, and to really think dads as you go back into your workplaces. There is a QR code for you in the delegate pack which will support with some of the work around the Mentimeter and the evaluation as well. We will be tweeting, as we always do in SSBC fashion, so if you follow us and you want to retweet or hashtag us, that would be absolutely fabulous. But now I'm delighted to hand over to Alex, who's going to do a far better job than me of kind of really guiding us through today. So I'd like to welcome Alex up onto the stage now.
Hello, is my microphone? Yes, it's on. We've double checked. Good morning, everybody. I hope you're all well. I think I know a few faces in here, or a few faces might know me, but for the rest of you, I guess I'm a bit of a stranger. So my name's Alex Mighton, as you'll see in the programme. I'm here to compare and just basically introduce our various excellent speakers we've got today. I'm also coming to this from the perspective of a dad, which is useful to give you some perspective from my side of things. But also I really want to hear some stuff from you about what you work on with dads and the things you see, because later on we're going to do something quite inclusive of all of you in the room to bring something together, a little piece of art that we're going to be able to take away in our memories, and hopefully it will be filmed later on today. I will be here throughout the day. I'm probably going to be sitting here if you've got any questions for me. But before I continue, I just want to say thank you to SSBC for putting this together, because I think it is really important to have father inclusivity as part of the childhood workforce. As a dad myself, we do get shunned sometimes when we go to those first maternity appointments, and it's like you're listening in and you're trying not to take over the space because it's about the mum. And also when you are when you have the baby and they said, yeah, don't ever ask your wife for sex, don't tell her anything about her appearance, don't. It's never very often do, or you're going to be a great dad, you're going to be able to support this child, you're going to be able to support that mother, and hopefully everybody in this room will be able to offer that little word of kindness to some of those dads that might be struggling with that and unsure of themselves in the journey that they go ahead with. But I'm going to stop talking about me and my thoughts, and I'm going to introduce our first speaker, who is Anna Tarrant. You may see in the programme that has swapped over, you may be expecting Anna Machin. I can read, but we've just swapped over. So we have Anna Tarrant coming to speak with us for the next 40 minutes, I believe. Anna, I can't see you, I'm sorry. I need to sort my eyesight out. Thank you, Anna. Would you like to join us and talk with everyone? Make some noise for Anna, everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah, mic check. Brilliant. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. I want to just say before I start a huge thank you to Felicity and the team for organising such a fantastic event. There's clearly a bit of a movement at the moment around father inclusion, and the research I've been doing for the past decade has really sort of culminated in a shift towards a manifesto towards father inclusion and a vision towards father inclusion. So the research I'm going to be talking about today and introducing you to is both a vision, a manifesto, but then also an evidence base that we're developing to demonstrate the value of father inclusion, the reasons why we need to be doing this, but then also the methodologies that we need to use to make that happen. So I'm going to try and take you on a bit of that journey today through a discussion of some of our work around young fatherhood. There is a biography for me in the handbook there, but just to give a bit of background on my work and my research. So I've been researching men's care responsibilities in families, as I say, for the last decade. I actually started researching grandfatherhood and looking at older men's roles in families, and since then and over time I've kind of switched and looked at the other end of the life course. But again, all of that work has been very applied in focus, and over time I've developed co-production methodologies, so very similar to the work being done in Nottingham, to think about how we mobilise the knowledge that's already out there, that professionals already have, to think about how we make this work, how we make this happen, what works in practice, and then how do we disseminate that knowledge and create a collective movement that holds that knowledge in order to then affect change on a broader level. So I just want to say today that as much as I'm talking as an expert around the research, a lot of my research is done in collaboration with professionals and with fathers as well. And a core argument that I want to make today is that we need to have dialogues, we need to have these kinds of conversations, and we need to have this kind of training and space event to be able to push things forward, to affect systems change, and to create a father inclusive policy and practice ecosystem. So I'm really keen to have conversations with you after this talk and to hear any questions that you may have. Sometimes the questions are often, what do we do just in our relationships with fathers? How do we start and initiate a conversation? Those kinds of questions I think are a core part of this work as much as the broader and bigger vision as well. So I hope to take you on board with that journey, but also do ask those kind of more searching and obvious questions as well as we go throughout the day. So, just in terms of presentation, the presentation overview, I'm going to start talking a little bit about the disconnect between these generational cultural shifts towards engaged fatherhood and then how people or fathers are responded to in policy and practice. I'll then talk about our research with young fathers, and I say this with a caveat that a lot of our research about young fathers focuses particularly on those who are socially disadvantaged, but again, I think what we're finding is that a lot of what works for young fathers works for fathers in general. So again, when we're going through the presentation, when talking about some of the evidence, do think about how that translates into practice more generally for fathers, regardless of their social background or age. I'm going to talk a little bit about father inclusion as an ideology, and I'm going to talk about some of the research and some of the theoretical work that is beginning to be developed around father inclusion. My argument actually is that this is relatively under-theorised as an idea. I think it's something that we talk about and we use in our everyday language, but I'm not entirely sure that we really actually have done the depth work to really understand how that translates and what that means. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit. I'm then also going to talk a bit more about the co-creation methodology. So this is a participatory methodology and one that brings together young dads with professionals and researchers in order to affect change at a broader system level. And I'm going to talk about some examples of some innovative work that we've been developing in the last 4 years to create dads groups and to create training offers with young dads at the very heart of that, and use those as exemplars, if you like, of how researchers can come together with professionals to enhance practice through an enhanced evidence base and creating an enhanced evidence base as well. And then just briefly, I'll just talk about what works as well, what we've found from existing research, just to provide some kind of insights into what you might do in your own practice. So, in terms of the broader research agenda, it's really important that we situate this within, as I say, broader cultural shifts around involved fatherhood. There's increasingly compelling evidence, and it's interdisciplinary evidence, and Anna Machin's work, which will be talked about in the next talk, is evidence of that dads matter. They matter to their children, they matter to their partners very often, and they matter to society. We know that in terms of cultural shifts and evidence of that 98% of fathers now attend the birth. 87% are now much more involved in day-to-day parenting activities. A third of dads since the COVID-19 pandemic are now changing jobs so that they can actually spend more time with their children. And 2/3 are now requesting change in their work patterns in order to be more involved with their children. We also know that this is broader value, as I say, for children, for women, and also for society at large. So there's an association or a wealth of evidence between father involvement and child development across the life course. But also, when men are engaged in family life, that also helps to promote shifts towards gender equality as well. The paradox in all of this and the challenge that I think we face on a societal level is that men in all their diversity are underrepresented in parenting and family research. So we don't actually speak to dads very often. We don't necessarily know what works because we don't know what matters to them. And they do continue to be considered a periphery role in family life, particularly in service and support contexts. So while there are individual shifts within families, on a broader societal levels, we're not seeing dads as involved and relevant caregivers all the time. We know that men on the margins as well are more likely to be increasingly disadvantaged by that, as well as all of the other disadvantages that they may face and bring into a support relationship. They're overlooked as being engaged in their family lives entirely. So very often we use the language of absent fathers and assume that that's a reason not to engage with dad. And that's something that we're trying to challenge through much of this research. And my core argument here really is that these individual shifts within families that we're seeing, that we're evidencing, are actually really fertile ground for shifting policy and practice. Because we've got evidence that these things are happening, that dads are invested and involved, we've actually got a really strong case and foundation from which to say, actually, we need to support this more and make sure it happens. So in terms of my research then, and a bit of my background, I'm going to talk about a qualitative longitudinal program of research that I've been involved in for the last 6 years, but it's actually a program of research that's been ongoing for well over a decade now. So what this research has done, it's called Following Young Fathers. It was established at the University of Leeds by Emerita Professor now, Bren Neal. It established the first longitudinal and dynamic study of young fathers. So 31 young dads were interviewed over 5 times across their parenting journeys to explore their support needs and their interactions with professionals and with services. And what we could really see was this very dynamic view of their lives. Very often their pregnancies were unplanned, they were experiencing a range of different challenges associated with poverty and challenging family circumstances, but they wanted to be there for their children, and that was a really core aspect of that work. The idea for this project actually came from professionals and from a consultation with professionals in Leeds. So Bren was really keen to research young motherhood. She felt that the research evidence base about young motherhood was relatively low and poor, really. But professionals were saying, look, we don't know what to do with young dads. You know, we're doing some work with them, but there's no evidence base. So she created this whole programme of study based on that observation. And I say that point just to observe, or just to make the argument that when researchers listen to professionals, we can start developing and addressing the gaps. Following that study, I became much more involved and started to work with different professionals across the UK to address gaps that we'd identified in support. So we ended up working with a council worker in Leeds who helped us to co-create the Young Dads Collective North in Leeds, and I'll talk about that in a bit more detail. And that was all about encouraging fathers to train professionals in being father inclusive. We also worked with Kate Bullman, who works in a prison setting, and we looked at how we support resettlement for young fathers when they come out of prison. And essentially what we did is we created new pathways of support through that project. It was very much an impact project and all about developing change through those productive partnerships. And that was really the seeds then for the current study that I'm now leading, which is following young fathers further. And in that study, what we're doing is we're taking those relationships forward again. We're co-creating different models of father-inclusive support. We're generating research evidence as we go through the process and evaluating that at the same time. And the idea is that we get a better global picture of young fatherhood through doing that, but then also more detailed focus work around instigating change. So that's the backdrop for the work that we're talking about today. So in terms of definitions, when we refer to young fathers, we're referring typically to young men who are aged 25 and under, and that's a policy narrative. Increasingly, professionals and services are working with people up to age 30, and I've got some sort of thoughts around why that is, and I'll talk about that in the next slide. But as mentioned, the focus on research, not just about young fatherhood, but about parenting in general, was very much on mothers. The research was really important, I think, because the broader societal narrative around young men was very deficit-focused. So the assumption, again, is that they were absent, but also feckless and deadbeat. So there was an argument there to change that narrative. And this was a narrative being used by policymakers as well. And there are some quite pertinent and disturbing kind of quotes that I haven't included in the presentation today around locking these young men up because they've got girls pregnant willy-nilly. So we were really trying to speak back against that and actually understand what young fathers' lives were really like. Where young fathers had been included in research, they were often included as co-parents and based on a very small sample. So again, we didn't have a strong evidence base. So what the project did was develop this dynamic longitudinal focus and create this more nuanced picture. And I'm just going to provide an overview now of some of the key findings from that initial study. So the intensive tracking revealed a great deal of volatility and demonstrated the contingencies of their lives. Again, they had challenging backgrounds, lack of family support, very short-term horizons, and these are all things they bring into support encounters, and couldn't plan for the next day. They adhered strongly to the ethos of engaged fatherhood, okay? So they were keen to adjust to the pregnancy and they were keen to develop roles as good fathers as well. And that's including if they were single or non-resident. So at the core is that commitment to their children, even though it's often assumed that they might not be. In that sample of research, 29 of the 31 pregnancies were unplanned, except in 2 cases. But the young men, they were shocked, they were distressed, and they felt they had no agency in their decisions to keep the child. But an unplanned child never translated into an unwanted child. So they adjusted, they went through some of the challenges and the difficult emotions surrounding that pregnancy, but again, demonstrated a commitment to be there. And services and professionals were key at helping them to manage some of those emotions, some of that anger as well. The relationships with the child's mother and with maternal grandmothers were absolutely pivotal in their ability to maintain and develop that role. So the wider family is a really important consideration in thinking about any of the resources that sit around young fathers or fathers when they come into a professional context. This was not necessarily straightforward, so where grandmothers were kind of gate openers for those young men, they helped them to be there to remain engaged in their children's lives. If they felt that the young father was a risk or they didn't want them to be involved, they could actually stop the young men from being involved in the lives of their child. So again, the power dynamics there within families are really important in their ability to be engaged fathers. There were a lack of relational, educational, socioeconomic and housing resources for a lot of these young men. And again, these were core thematic areas that were observed across the range of the different interviews. But it was these elements that hampered their abilities to be there for their children predominantly. And this was especially compounded for those who are in entrenched poverty, for young offender fathers, those who were brought up in the care system, and then those with mental health problems. So those were the core findings there. Now, the argument that I want to make on the basis of this is that if we understand that context, if we understand some of the challenges, some of the things that they're navigating as they become a parent, then I think we shift away from an individualising and blame-based deficit narrative about young fathers to think much more about the context in which engaged fatherhood happens. And my argument is that if we have people who are expressing that need to be there, we then need the contextual conditions to be able to support that. So policy and service systems are important in shaping young father engagement. And again, we've done some comparative research with young fathers in Sweden. So Sweden's much more known to be father-friendly. It's not a panacea by any means. But what we've found is that in both country contexts, young fathers express their intentions to be there for their children, but it's much more challenging for the young men in the UK. Over time, welfare systems have become increasingly conditional. The ability to get the things you need, the resources you need to become a parent, so a house, a relationship, a steady relationship, and all of those things that support men to fulfill their aspirations to be men in the ways they want to be, are increasingly difficult for these young people. So again, I just want to keep that in the frame, really, that this is becoming increasingly challenged for people at the very same time that people are saying we want to be more involved in our children's lives as fathers. The support system for young fathers in the UK as well entrenches those inequalities. And if we have a look at that, again, these are structural issues and challenges. So overall, to provide a broader picture, this UK support system is highly fragmented, and it's also very gendered, and it's experienced in gendered ways. It's really laudable that there are pockets of good practice. So Nottingham, really are flying the flag as an exemplar of how to do that at the different levels of the system. But this is not happening in a coherent way across the UK by any means. And actually, I think what we need longer term is a more coherent policy around father inclusion to help to address some of these challenges. But again, these are the systems that professionals are working within. So when we're coming to these kinds of events and suggesting changes that might be made by professionals in individual interactions with fathers, we also need to keep in the frame some of the things that professionals are also navigating and the challenges that they're having to work, and constraints they're working within as they engage with fathers. Academic research has kind of captured some of this. So I've referenced the work of Georgia Phillip there, and Fitzner colleagues, they're actually US based, but lots of very similar challenges over in the US as well. But when young fathers are coming into contact with services, they're encountering very pervasive gendered occupational cultures, and that might include persistence in gendered ways of thinking and acceptance of stereotypes that assume their disinterest in parenting. There's limited opportunity for training and reflective supervision of professionals. Again, it's really encouraging to see these kinds of events, but again, the costs associated with those and the time that you need to take out of an already busy work schedule to do this kind of training is an additional challenge that people are struggling to build into their broader continuing professional development. There are increasing constraints on workload capacity, and again, that's linked to cuts to services and cuts to resources. And then also maternal reluctance to champion dads as well. So, you know, very often services are mother-centric, they are designed and developed for women, and if there are challenges within the relationship, it can be then difficult to see dads, and they become less visible. In terms of specialist support, so I'm talking more generally really about universal services, but specialist support offers are there, but they're very much a postcode lottery. So they're often driven by smaller charities. I'm thinking about the North East Young Dads and Lads as an example, which is a great charity up in Gateshead. There's organisations like Dads Matter. But again, you really do need someone who can champion that work and can sustain that work over time, and the funding that's required to sustain that. And of course, charities are also competing over smaller pots of funding as well. So that makes the sustainability of this kind of work really challenging. In terms of policy as well in the UK, I just want to make the broader point around the sort of public health element of this, particularly in relation to teenage fatherhood. But the drive in particular around teenage pregnancy is the intention to bring down teenage pregnancy rates and to decrease that. But there's a less emphasis on support. So there's all of these different competing narratives, discourses, approaches that are working against us all the time when we're trying to be father inclusive. That sounds a bit depressing, and I'm going to, again, think about how we change and challenge that as we go through. But again, what young fathers tell us about support needs is a really important starting point for thinking about what next and what works. So we know that they experience a range of different disadvantages, and again, I think fathers in general will bring some of these challenges also into their encounters with professionals. We know they're going to come into the orbit of mainstream and universal, mainstream and specialist services. But there are also discourses within professional practice that construct young fathers as hard to reach. And again, that really feeds into this deficit view of young fathers. And actually, Alison Hadley encourages that we actually think about how are our services hard to access. So how do we make services more visible, based on the assumption that they might be invisible to dads, they might be in the language catered to mums, could they be better catered to dads, for example. We also know that they experience a combination of support, surveillance and sidelining, and one professional could actually display any of those three kinds of approaches in their interactions with fathers. And I'm going to just give some evidence of that and how that's experienced in a moment. But the surveillance and sidelining elements tend to be the thing that the young dads report experiencing in their interactions the most. And these are very much based on a risk-based approach rather than a strengths-based approach. So rather than seeing young dads as a resource for their children, they see them as a risk for their children. So our arguments from this research is how do we actually flip that on its head and create a more caring and compassionate ethos and approach and foster that environment based on a redemptive and strength-based narrative. So here's just a few examples. So when support works, it works really well. So we've got Zayn, he's aged 18. We interviewed him all the way back in 2010 now, but he said, he's talking about professionals and his encounters with them. He says they were absolutely great, and you kind of knew the step-by-step things that were going to happen. You knew what happened when she became this far dilated or anything like that, so you had a pretty good view, and as you were going along anyway, they were like, okay, this is what you're going to do, this is what's happening now. So you were always informed. You always knew what was going to happen. It seemed like it was kind of like a routine thing. They did this to everyone, irrespective of their age, gender. So they did seem kind of like very good professionals. So the opposite of the don't narrative, which is really, really positive. So again, an example here of what works. Sidelining was the most common experience for many of these young men. So here, Jason is talking about midwives. Just to add context to this, that again, they talked about a whole range of different professionals, and they're not targeting any particular professional group here. But he said, I said to the midwife, how come you never ever address me? When you've got anything to say about my son, you never tell me. It's always my girlfriend, and I'm left in the dark. You're just talking in riddles. She just said it's easier, and she's mum after all. So again, through that language, you know, that kind of invisibilization, if you like, of the dad, the marginalization of the dad in that encounter, and the assumption that mum and dad are separate and in a silo and not together in a relationship. And then surveillance. These were the kind of more risk-based approaches, and of course necessary in child protection contexts. But here, Callum says, I don't like it when someone's watching you, you feel stupid because you've got people looking down on you, you can't play with your kids properly, you don't want to start pulling dodgy faces and that, you know what I mean? You can't have a proper laugh with your kids, you want to feel more confident, don't want to feel like a bloody criminal. So again, you know, this provokes emotion, this provokes reaction in these young men. That often translates into anger, that often does translate into lack of confidence, and it feeds into that over time. So there really is a transformative element here where a professional turns around and says, how are you, Dad? What can I do to support you? Or why are you feeling or the way you're feeling? A question you often need to ask much later on, because many men don't necessarily, and young men in particular, don't want to disclose their lack of confidence early on in a relationship. So there's just some examples of the kinds of examples that came out of the research. So this is the evidence that galvanised my study, Following Your Fathers further. I was pushed really to think about the vision, to think about this as a leadership agenda. So the funding that I received for this work is a Future Leaders Fellowship, and that was all about how do you create change in a particular area. And I was very keen to develop this language around father inclusion. And to think about how we create this policy practice ecosystem in that way. The language of father inclusion, as I say, is under-theorised, but again, there's increasing evidence that there is value to this. So the evidence to talk about here, really, I'm going to talk about Karen Bateson's work, is that it has broader socio and health-based outcomes for the wider family. So it does promote the father's well-being, but beyond that, it helps them build their own capacity to support mother's psychological well-being. It promotes maternal health behaviours as well, and promotes children's mental health and development. So those are some of the core areas where father inclusion is of benefit. It's also a multifaceted concept, and there are multiple components to it. So more broadly, there's an ethos around bringing men into the work in all their diversity and regardless of the complexity of their personal circumstances. But it's also a set of skills and also a mindset as well. And I really like, this is Patrice Rollins' work. She's a US-based scholar, works with African-American fathers. And I think she distills kind of the elements of this in a really effective way. So this is the kind of things that she argues professionals need to bring into any service encounter. So the first is knowledge. So again, a historical or understanding of the historical discourse of father involvement. So some of the stuff that we've talked about and looked at earlier in the presentation. It's about having an understanding of parental roles, a broad knowledge of fatherhood research and theories, and then an understanding of power dynamics and gender and how that plays into all of that. In terms of skills, she argues this translates into the need for cultural humility and competence, ability to communicate effectively, to engage effectively, to engage in participatory strategies. So again, that's based on authentic listening, building relationships of trust over time with families and with fathers. It's about resource brokering and service navigation. So again, understanding the broader context in which the support offer is operating in. And then also about interprofessional collaboration. So again, this is not about individuals trying to change the world on their own. This is about understanding local resource and utilising those resources to create a broader, holistic environment that's father inclusive and supportive. She also argues it's a mindset as well, so it's about being reflexive, so having an awareness of yourself and others, taking a strengths-based perspective, but then also thinking about how things might be developed or changed, taking an ethical approach, and then also a professional approach as well. So again, in reflecting on your own encounters in professional practice, it can be useful, I think, to use this as a framework to think through how that might have happened or might be done differently in the future. Taking that out a level, This is a kind of a paper by Fitzner et al. Again in the US. And they talk about the challenges across the process of trying to identify fathers and bring them into the work. So I really like their model around getting fathers, keeping fathers, and engaging fathers. And again, this is a diverse model. There's lots of different elements to this and to the kinds of engagement that we need to think through as services in order to bring fathers in. We might need to think about the range of practical, relational, cultural and contextual factors, strategic and structural factors that might impede and or support each of those levels of the process. But essentially, the temporal lens, I think, helps us to think more about this as a longer term process. One key argument that comes out of all of the literature around what works with engaging dads is around perseverance and persistence. I think a lot of services kind of think, we're not engaging dads right now, or we're struggling to engage dads, or dads aren't interested. Where it becomes more successful, I think, is where you keep plugging away, keep going, keep trying to develop the kind of the languages that bring dads in, thinking about what hooks them in. Some of the most successful services, particular specialist services, they use the language of dad, so they make it clear that the service is for dad. And they also have a hook as well, so it's not just necessarily being a dad, but it might be rock music, it might be pizza and DIY night, that kind of thing can be really helpful. So it's important to, again, I think in our strategic thinking as well, and this is relevant to managers, but as well as to professionals, about that process and how we better develop those mechanisms. I also just want to share a quote from, this is Rob, from the North East Young Dads and Lads. He tells us that father-inclusive practice is important again. He says, let's start with the most important talking point when we're asked this question. The young fathers themselves. I think it's extremely important that their involvement from the very beginning is recognised at its absolute fullest from all angles. When it comes to supporting them through parenthood, as this is without doubt one of the proudest moments of their lives, but can also be the scariest. As you can imagine, some of the potential thoughts going through their heads at that moment in time, becoming a dad, am I going to be good enough? Will I be able to provide my family? I hope I don't let anyone down. So, hopefully I've convinced you that there's compelling evidence of the need for this kind of work, and that there are mechanisms in which that we can draw and we can use to be able to do this. So I'm going to talk a bit more about the methodologies now from Following Young Fathers further. This is an innovation or innovative approach we've been trying to test for essentially the past 6 years. Again, my key argument is that this work needs to be empirically driven. We can't just assume we understand what dads need. We can't just assume we understand what professionals need either. So if we bring everyone together into these collaborative relational ecologies, I use the language of, and develop these conversations like we're doing today, then I think we're better able to do this kind of work. So in terms of the process of this methodology, Following Young Fathers was very much about establishing the evidence base, so what young dads need. Responding to young dads in a different way, the second phase was about working with professionals in co-production to think about what gaps there are and what we need. And then in this third phase, we're now co-creating new dads groups, one of which is in Grimsby. And we're doing the comparative international research as well to think about the need for broader policy and systems change. I'm going to make a case for co-creation because I think it is possible, and I think it is an approach that is working in terms of creating these innovations and in bringing fathers into the work. In our project, what it's doing is it's bringing together young fathers with the range of stakeholders that will be invested in their support offer to promote more positive visions of fatherhood. And it's also doing that across the systems as well. So it's promoting that within the individual and within the family context. It's about promoting that with and for professionals. And longer term, our hope is that it will galvanise policy change as well. Co-creation is, again, a participatory method that I think helps to address what is an undefined and complex challenge that surpasses the capacity of any single actor. It's a form of collaborative knowledge generation as well. So we're researching this and evidencing this process as we go through. And it's all about bringing communities with lived experience together to promote that knowledge and generate that knowledge with us. It's an increasingly popular methodology that's being used to align research and service development more generally. It's being used quite a lot in public health, but less so in farther inclusive practice. So again, this is kind of a test bed, if you like, for how this works in terms of in terms of social interventions. But it's also about action research cycles as well. So evidence is fed back in real time. So are our tweaks, are the things we're doing to try and instigate change working or not? If not, how do we adjust that and do things in a different way to make sure that it can work? So the core example of that I want to talk about is the Young Dads Collective approach. So this was a model that was originally established by Quorum Family and Childcare, which is a London-based charity. And since then, since 2016, we've instigated a new version of this in Leeds, and we're now instigating another example of that in Grimsby, as I said. So you can see some of the dads there. This is some of the dads from London and Leeds who came together. They actually presented on a panel together to an audience of this size and told the audience why professional practice, supportive professional practice is really important to them. It was really emotional. We were hoping to have some of the young dads from the North East Young Dads and Lads here today, but there's a train strike, so we would have hoped to have done the same thing today and sort of demonstrate the value of that. But what you see is you see professionals really have light bulb moments. It makes it really real when the young dads are in the room, when they're talking about some of their challenges, and it's not an adversarial space, it's a safe space where they can actually share what it is that they've experienced and what could be done better. I think what's really great about this model as well is that it does speak across multiple levels. So we see the individual development of the young dads as experts by experience. So they're involved in the process of building their own confidence, of building their own stories and narratives, and then sharing those with professionals. And certainly from the Young Dads Collective North in Leeds, 3 dads who'd been unemployed went into employment after they'd been involved in that process because they were able to evidence their ability to engage with professionals and to engage in a professional way. There is a caveat with all this work, of course, that some of the more deprived, disadvantaged young dads struggle to engage in the work in that kind of way. So again, being reflexive and being responsible for the young dads is a core part of this work. It's also a peer support model. So what it does is it brings together lots of young dads around a shared identity. That helps them to build their confidence and build trust in the process over time as well. So where peer support is possible or where it can be signposted to, it's really important to do that as part of a support offer. For professionals, it addresses the gap in lack of continued professional development, particularly around father inclusion. And what we do after our events, when we do training, they vary in size. Sometimes it's like audiences of 20. Before we've had an audience of 100, for example, so it can vary. But we ask professionals to make pledges to practice as well. So based on what they've heard from the fathers, we ask them to write down what they do differently and or what's been confirmed for them that they do well already. That's had varying levels of, or varying degrees of success. It's been very interesting, actually. Some professionals in Grimsby felt quite affronted by that, being asked to make a pledge to practice. So what we ask instead is that they just take the time in that space to be reflexive about what they do in their encounters with dads, and that seems to have helped. I suppose what we're trying to push towards more now, we have had a few situations where dads have been able to speak to policymakers, but we want to see that broader systems change. And again, including dads in that conversation is really powerful. So the dads from the North East Young Dads and Lads, for example, have presented at the APPG on fatherhood with us, and they have been involved in a variety of campaigns and advocacy type work to talk about why dads are important. Again, really powerful for galvanising that and creating that conversation. So I think what we're seeing with this model really is the seeds of ecosystemic change. So in terms of the model manager, we've evidenced that they see this model as being about service change, but that there are also these broader outcomes associated with that. So there are lots of benefits that come with dads being more involved in their children's lives, which equate to benefits for children more broadly. She argues, I think, any sort of project which promotes a level of equality for particular groups is beneficial to everyone, not just the group it's supporting. One of the dads said, buzzing, love being listened to. It's not just the work with the professionals, it's about meeting up with other dads, and when we do the planning, we all want other dads to have a better experience. And then just as an example of professional feedback, I'll think more about how to help young fathers. I'll think beyond mums. Again, this has been useful in terms of my own research process, but for services who are trying to evidence the change that they're making, these kinds of qualitative comments and quotes can be really powerful for demonstrating and evidencing systems change that's ongoing. My final example, before I start to wrap up, is the North East Young Dads and Lads. So I'm currently the Chair of Trustees for the North East Young Dads and Lads, and I've been working with them since around June 2020. I saw Kev, the CEO, on Children in Need during the pandemic and reached out. And again, the North East Young Dads and Lads are a specialist service that are really pioneering work with young fathers. Again, I just say that what we're doing is work that's done as part of a specialist charity, but there's lots that can be drawn out for universal services as well in terms of what works for fathers. But the North East Young Dads and Lads have created a brand new e-learning platform called DigiDad, which is created with and for young dads, and it's designed to talk to dads about a range of different challenges and issues they may be experiencing in their parenting journeys from the perspectives of young dads. And I'd encourage you to share that with any dads you may be working with in your own professional practice. But just in brief, a little bit about North East Young Dads and Lads. It started as a charity in Gateshead in 2017, and its core vision is for young dads to be valued and supported in their role as parents. So again, aligning really strongly with the Following Your Father's further research. The mission is to enable young dads to play a safe, active and meaningful role in their children's lives by supporting and connecting them and influencing wider practice. And the key objectives of the charity is to provide individual support to young dads, to enable them to engage in a range of different activities, and that includes research, to provide opportunities to improve their knowledge, skills, confidence and self-esteem, and then to influence policy and practice. Okay, so again, we've got shared goals here, shared interests and aims, and these are the kinds of things that can be built into service plans and service design. They address a whole range of different challenges in relation to young men, so loneliness and isolation, poor mental health, neglected physical health, loss and bereavement, drug and alcohol dependency, food, fuel and digital poverty, low educational attainment and NEET status, homelessness and poor housing, being overlooked by professionals, relationship breakdown, and then need for help around children's social care proceedings. Just seeing that list, and this was provided to me by Kev, it's so stark how such needs can be turned quickly into a deficit approach, and how that can feed into sidelining and surveillance. So again, if we address these with a care and compassion lens, we're much better able to help them to be the dads they want to be. In terms of the kinds of activities that are offered by the service, they provide an extensive provision, including intensive one-to-one support. I will argue that and what we're seeing is that with young dads in particular, peer support has to be accompanied by one-to-one intensive support. They do need the time, they need the investment to help them to build their confidence, to be able to engage with other young men. But they do a whole range of brilliant activities. There's a cycling club, football, they do beekeeping. They've got on the Baltic where their offices are, they've got a beekeeping, they've got a hive, and one of the Oldham trustees supports one of the young dads to do his beekeeping, which is amazing. They've created honey and everything, which I've got at home, which is lovely, and you can buy it. They've done paediatric first aid training and family excursions. So again, in line with the kind of young dads collective model, they're upskilling all the time. So it's not just social, it's also stuff that helps with employment and their longer term prospects. And what these charities and services are doing, I think, is bridging a gap where they've had very disrupted life course trajectories. They also engage in all sorts of volunteering, but more recently we've just set up the Ambassador Dads Peer Council as well. So what we're trying to do with that is that some of the older beneficiaries who have now built some confidence are now coming together as a group. They're reporting to the board and they're telling us, or they're feeding in on strategies for the charity and for the organisation, and they're also going out and doing some of the training with professionals that the dads in the Young Dads Collective model are doing as well. And just a quote from one of the dads, because we need the evidence, of course. So I wanted to say a massive thank you when I was living up north. Honestly, if it wasn't for you, I know generally I would have committed suicide. You were the one person who never judged me. You are an amazing person, an amazing dad, and I never grew up with a dad myself. But you are what dads should aspire to be. So that's one of the dads talking about Care for CEO. I just wanted to show you a video of one of the DigiDad content. So this is about crying babies. I'm going to see if I can get this to work. It's not too loud.
Uh-oh, you're looking out of your depth there, mate.
When crying or upset, your baby may need some help.
And us dads need to figure out the clues.
You need to be a regular Scooby-Doo.
It might be that they're hungry,
Or teething,
tired or cold,
hurt themselves,
want attention,
or are just feeling knackered.
or it might be that toy on the floor that children's picking up.
Babies can't talk, but they can cry, smile, and laugh. That's how they communicate. If they're crying, they're saying they need you and you should go to them.
Don't worry if the crying makes you feel anxious. That's completely normal. They aren't doing it on purpose or trying to wind you up, and you might not know exactly what's wrong with them every time.
Babies need to learn how to get what they need by communicating, and that's down to you.
If they cry and always get ignored, they won't trust you.
If they cry and you always get angry, they won't feel safe with you.
If they cry and always get passed to someone else, they won't build up a bond with you.
If they cry and always get given a screen, they don't learn that it's their dad who's always there for them.
Never shout, hit, or shake your baby. If you are struggling and need a break, then ask for some help.
Right, get ready for some top tips on crying. Number 1, stay calm.
Number 2, make sure your baby is safe and not in pain.
Number 3, calmly go through all the things that it is likely to be. Nappy, hungry, thirsty, tired, teething, feeling poorly, needs a cuddle.
Number 4, if none of this works, trust your instincts. Never be afraid to ask for advice. Remember, your health visitor and family nurse is always at the end of the phone. Cracked it. This time she just wanted someone to play with.
So as we all now know, crying is how your baby lets you know stuff. So treat your baby well, be interested, and play with them so she'll know that her world is a good, fun, and happy place.
Parent like a boss and get involved. It's bound to put a smile on your face and theirs.
There we go. So that's just one example. More recently, we've developed some content around feeding babies. We're working with the family hubs, again, to make sure that everything is up to date in terms of legislation requirements, to think really closely about our imagery as well. We're very thoughtful around diversity and the kind of images that we present in each of these videos as well, just to make sure they're appealing to a diverse group of dads. But again, a lovely resource. It's open access and free, so again, you can, if you can, recommend it. If you want to have a look at it in your own practice, that would be amazing. We've also co-created a Think Dad toolkit for professionals. There's a link on there as well. So that's got a list of lots of different images. We've got QR codes where you can listen to quotes from young dads talking about their experiences. So we're really trying to bring this into a digital space. We've got Tyler up there being interviewed for one of these videos as well. So some of it shows the dads, some of it is cartoon based or uses figures and that kind of thing. So again, really pioneering work in that regard. So in sum, I'm conscious I've been talking for a while now. as I've mentioned, this supports everyone in the system to collaborate, to champion dads, and to share best practice. So this is all about the celebration of dads, and again, shifting away from those kind of more negative language and views that actually might shut down a support relationship. To understand what works, we need to know about what dads need as a starting point, and that enables us to more readily translate and mobilise that knowledge based on a strengths rather than risk-based approach. Co-creation as a methodology helps us to translate evidence in real time, but as well as to generate it as well. To be father inclusive, I think what we really need is to see dads as experts by experience. We need to have professionals who are galvanised to identify and address the barriers to father inclusion, and we need, as I say, coherent policy, and I'm going to keep banging that drum. Final thoughts are on how to be part of the change, and I hope I've dropped in a few suggestions and kind of recommendations as I've gone through. The core thing, and you're all here today doing this already, which is great, but is to think dad. Ask about dad and welcome dad into what are traditionally or seen as women-only services. We know that when dads are empowered to tell their stories to professionals, real transformation and change can happen. Relational and strengths-based work is key, but it does take time, it does take perseverance, and it does take persistence. There are already lots of examples of good practice out there, so do talk among one another, ask each other what has worked, and take that forward in your own professional practice. Some organisational changes can also make big differences, so actually championing fathers to your managers as well can be really important. And again, if we can start building in father inclusion into service design, that takes a lot of the onus off individual professionals, and it means that people could come on board much more quickly. A key thing I talk about at everything, all the training I do, and I hear at all the training I do, is lack of data. So build in questions about dad, not just about what risk they pose to child or mum, but ask about how dad is, whether dad's in the picture, all of those different kinds of questions. Tell mum that dad is important as well, and collecting data about dad is part of that process. We ask you to directly challenge some of the stigma and some of these pervasive negative stereotypes by seeing dads as experts by experience. And also, I ask that you prioritise research and consultation in your localities and in your region. Hopefully you want to, or this presentation demonstrates the value of also working with researchers, working with universities, working with those who can help to translate some of this knowledge into the evidence base. Again, all of this is driven by what's already out there, what's known. It's capturing it, and that's helping to shift these things forward, even if only very slowly and incrementally. I'm going to finish with a quick plug. We have our own conference taking place on the 7th of December to celebrate all of this research and to share our latest findings. That's taking place in Lincoln on the 7th of December. We have a Twitter account which is following YFF, which has got the Eventbrite registration page on it. There's going to be lots of interactive workshops with lots of our partners, so that includes the North East Young Dads and Lads, the Grimsby Dads Collective. We've got someone from PACT, from the Prison Advice and Care Trust. The Imagine a Man team are going to talk about positive masculinities in young men as future dads. And we've also got an interactive theatre presentation by All Right Mate, which will focus on men's mental health and again how professionals can support men with that. We've also got a growing community as well, so please do join that. Visit our website. You'll get updates on the research and on the various activities that we're going to be doing in the next sort of 3 years. Another really cheeky plug, but the book's coming out in next year, due in 2024, based on the earlier slides about what we've learned about young fatherhood as well. That's going to be published with Policy Press, so we'll have something more concrete and written up there that you'll be able to access. Select publications, and then that's me. Thank you for coming on this journey with me. Any questions, I'm very happy to answer those. I'm conscious I've gone way over my time, so I'll stop there. Thank you. Shall I go?
Thank you very much, Anna. Really appreciate
No
you.
problem. Am I staying or going? I
You
don't
can
know
do what you want.
the...
You can sit down or bring a chair if you want. We'll have a cup of tea.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Thank you so much.
No, thank you.
I guess you guys have seen your QR codes in your programs. If you've got any questions for Anna, then drop them on there. We're going to speak about them around 12:30, I believe.
Oh, yeah,
So you'll be
okay.
able to do that. So you can have a break, you can sit down, have a water.
Thank you.
But thank you so much.
Thanks for your time, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Ooh, that was a lot. I did not expect that level of detail and research that had gone into it. And it's fantastic to know that is actually happening and is going to help practice going forward. Now, Anna, I know you've got a book coming out, but you've already got this one out, right? Is that correct? Okay, so Anna does have this book, which is out currently. And we have Anna Machin speaking with us shortly, who has, hang on, let me just pop this down without moving slides, this book coming out shortly. And you do have a chance to be a lucky winner of these books signed by said authors, but I need you to do one thing first. So has everybody in their packs got their Think Dad's evaluation form? Oh, the rustling of the bags. Go on, have a look. What's in there then, sweetheart? Go on, have a look. Got it? And I'm sure you've got a writing implement too, right? So what we want to check, really, is your understanding and your awareness of father-inclusive practices, etc. At this point now, as you begin this conference, and then we want to check again after all of the talks, and all of the videos and the people that you've seen today have spoken to see if it's increased. Standard evaluation form, but if you get yours in, you do have a chance of winning both of these books signed, and they are fantastic. I'm actually going to get a copy not signed. I'm going to buy them. I'm not even in practice, but as a dad, sometimes reading a book about the things around it and the societal changes that are needed actually help you. So thank you, I've learned a lot today. So we are going